Hi, it's Nick from the podcast. Don't worry, the audio quality is fine this time. Just popping in to say that the latest issue of my comic series Sold, that's Sold with a U, S-O-U-L-D, is now up on Kickstarter. So if you read the first issue late last year, then it's time to get the resolution to that cliffhanger. This is my story about a corporation who is trying to convert all our souls into rock form and then obviously sell them, along with two sisters who are trapped within this plan and a mysterious artist who is using this soul rock to create weird art. It's by me, Phil Appley, JP Jordan and Letter Squids, and yep, if you want you can get the new issue or both issues on Kickstarter now. The link will be in the show notes. Thank you very much. Here's your podcast.
Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be drawn back into our vigilante life in Daredevil Born Again, and then exploring the darker side of technology in Black Mirror Season 7. But before all of that, Nick, do you have something to recommend to our listeners?
Yep, another long-standing superhero show that we have covered before, although not one that's been cancelled and come back this time. I watched the fourth and final season of Superman and Lois. This is the show featuring Tyler Hoechlin and Elizabeth Tulloch as Superman and Lois at a sort of older parent stage of their life when they have twin teenage sons and have moved back to Smallville to raise them with all that open space. And unfortunately, perhaps inevitably, one of their kids has now developed superpowers and must reckon with both teenage angst and, of course, the looming threat of supervillains. And yes, this is the fourth and final season of this long-running, soapy, family-orientated Superman show. I think I covered it in the recommendations a few years back when I watched the first season. And yep, having watched the last one, I thought I'd come back and give it another crack. And yeah, still pretty good. Lex Luthor finally turns up in the fourth and final season. As you'd hope, we finally get their take on Lex Luthor and also their take on Doomsday, the celebrity Superman killing villain from the 90s. So yep, some real greatest hits coming for this final year. And yeah, it's pretty good. It feels a tiny bit rushed at a mere 10 episodes rather than the 13 to 15 they had before. There's a slightly less leisurely vibe to the pacing, but it does at least make it feel a bit more, action-packed and immediate for this final year. The slightly more conspicuous part is that in the previous seasons they had this massive supporting cast of Smallville residents. There was Superman's friend Lana, her husband, their daughter, Lois's colleague at the local paper, a couple of other people from the area, and they've all just been kind of quietly demoted down a bit for this final season. They're only in a couple of episodes each in the last year rather than appearing in every episode, which again does make it feel a bit more plot driven, not having to service all these local folk. But after 3 seasons I was actually quite attached to them, so kind of a shame to see them demoted a bit, but they all came back for the final episode anyway.
Sounds good. I'm glad that it maintained its quality. Do you feel it paid off when it got to the end? Was it a satisfactory completion of the story arc?
I think it did give us the main thing we tend to want and get from this show, which is the sort of good vibes of Superman as dad trying to do his best to make the right decision for his family and square that with his self-imposed responsibilities as Superman. The idea that Superman is, always trying to do the right thing and is always a good dude but can still sometimes make mistakes is, a way of making the character work and seem dramatic. And plus, the emotional stakes of things that are problems for the family, but not necessarily problems for Superman. Like in the third season, there's a quite emotive storyline in which Lois Lane gets cancer, which is obviously, good, solid Superman stuff because, he can punch Doomsday all he wants, but he can't cure cancer. So yeah, it's good sort of slightly weepy soap opera stuff.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, and it sounds like a good vibe for Superman. Again, a lot of the recent versions of Superman, I feel, haven't really got the tone right. They've sort of focused more on Superman as this kind of imperious godlike figure, where the slightly naff but generally well-meaning, caring dad figure probably sounds more like the sort of tone that I can imagine working for Superman.
Well, yeah, Superman as dad. I don't know. Maybe the problem that people perceive with Superman making him work in this new world is his sort of slightly olden day daddish lameness. So if that's the problem, then why not just make him dad? You can't accuse Superman of being too dad if Superman basically is dad. So yeah, it actually works pretty well. I'll be interested to see how James Gunn approaches it when they do a slightly more classic era living in Metropolis with a secret identity version of Superman.
I say, yeah, that was what I was thinking. In that obviously this is not the only piece of Superman media that's been released this year. Yeah, so we're getting another new take of Superman this year. Not the Zack Snyder one that I discussed before, not the one that you've discussed just now, but a new James Gunn one. Obviously, his tone has been very much sort of, tongue firmly in cheek with a bit of humour. And, that I can see that working for Guardians of the Galaxy or the Suicide Squad, but I guess Superman comes with a lot more baggage. I guess we'll see how successful he is. If any humour he injects kind of makes it, an entertaining blockbuster or something that people feel isn't taking the character seriously. I mean, it could really go either way.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, James Gunn isn't, opposed to a bit of, achingly sincere emotion. Everyone famously cried at Guardians of the Galaxy 3. So I feel he could make it work. I'm interested to see how that ends up being.
He's certainly good at character and storytelling. I mean, Rocket Raccoon could have been the comedy talking raccoon who's a bit of a hotshot. But yeah, as you say in that third film, he really managed to find some kind of heart and soul in the character. Yeah, I mean, he should be able to find something relatable and connectable to in Superman or Clark Kent based on how you feel. I feel, the kind of relatableness of Superman is definitely something that Zack Snyder was less interested in, shall we say. So I think, James Gunn's focus on character will, should be a good thing. Yeah, hopefully.
I think the one thing people who criticise Superman do at least have a point about is, it is quite hard to make him interesting if the fundamental thing about him is, his superheroics and his punching. He's so incredibly powerful that if the primary thing is can he punch that guy, then, the odds are yes, he can punch that guy. I feel like if you don't lean quite hard into the Clark stuff, it's just not that good.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And I assume the reason for the existence of Doomsday is someone so powerful that Superman can't just punch him to death.
Well, yeah, I mean, the beat, for the most part, is that, he's something Superman is genuinely scared of, and as befits the character, he does at least temporarily kill Superman at one point in the show, and Superman is actually out of it for a few episodes, and it's mostly just focusing on the sad spectacle of his family mourning him, which after 3 seasons of getting to quite like them is actually very sad.
Yeah.
Mostly because they do entirely buy into it from an emotional point of view.
Yeah, I can see that working. Yeah, I can absolutely see that working. Was it a good take on Lex Luthor as well?
I think it's a fairly classic Lex Luthor, it doesn't really get much into, his soul. If anything, Lex Luthor is, they introduce a daughter for him at one point. You start to wonder if they're going to, redeem Lex Luthor, but no, it turns out Lex Luthor is the one person who can't be redeemed by the love of his family. Lex Luthor, very consciously at one point in the show, decides that he cares more about his vendetta against Superman and Lois than he does about his family, and basically turns his back on his daughter. So, on the one hand, after 3.5 seasons of solid family and love are everything. Family and love are everything. It does very much place Lex counter to the themes of the show in a way that makes him a good villain. On the other hand, once you establish that he really is just a villain who cares about nothing but vengeance. It's a fairly simple take, but, he works in the show.
Yeah, again, I can see that working, as, a way to link the themes of the show in with the character drama and the overall plot. But yeah, I suppose it's not the most sophisticated take on a villain. But yeah, I guess it depends on what they're aiming for. I guess they're not really aiming for deep characterization of Lex Luthor this time.
But he is genuinely threatening, which is about what you can ask for from a villain, and which, as many have said before, is, sometimes difficult to pull off, considering you've got on the one hand a superpowered alien and on the other hand a bald man. It does at least do a good job of showing how, through a combination of psychological manipulation and technology, he can actually be a threat.
Yeah. So I suppose that is also something that previous incarnations of Superman have struggled with as well. I mean, I think in the Snyder ones, it was mainly carried on the fact that Jesse Eisenberg has a lot of great charisma, and he's, again, a talented actor who enjoys camping it up as a villain. That's usually fun to watch. But yeah, I guess beyond that, wasn't a particularly successful take on Lex Luthor either.
Yeah, now this one, it's not so much camp as it is just sort of southern and vengeance driven.
Yeah.
The guy who played Lex Luthor in Supergirl, I think it's John Cryer from 2.5 Men, was actually incredibly good. Yeah, that was a good Lex Luthor. I liked him a lot.
Yeah, so yeah, there are ways you can make the character work. I used to enjoy the Superman and Lois show. Was that what it was called? The one in the 90s?
Superman and Lois is the one I'm talking about now. The one in the 90s, confusingly, was Lois and Clark.
That was it, yeah. I knew I was going to get the order wrong or the name slightly wrong because the name is quite similar, yeah. But I seem to remember that show having a decent Lex Luthor as well. I mean, for the value of the show it was very much Superman-esque, mid-afternoon entertainment.
Yeah, I mean, confusingly, he had hair for a lot of the time, which was a bit strange. But yeah, he was a decent actor.
Yeah. I'm glad the show ended well, because I know you've been enjoying it, and it's always good to know that, it does complete its arc and pay off nicely. It doesn't trail out the end or get cancelled before they can actually do the ending that they've, I guess, been building up to.
Yeah, no, it was a decent conclusion. I know there are some people who are a bit sort of, they've cancelled it because of the film. They could have done another season or two, and I guess they could have done, but they did 4 seasons. They did what I think ends up being about just over 50 episodes. That's pretty good for a show in the modern world.
Yeah, a lot of shows don't get that long, to be honest. And also also, yeah, a lot of shows finish on ridiculous cliffhangers by getting cancelled and you never find out what happens. So at least, yeah, this you get a proper ending. And yeah, you don't also get something that kind of just trails off through some slightly like subpar seasons.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I'm happy with it. And I guess technically this does mark the end of the entire of the vaguely Arrowverse affiliated universe of shows, even though the connection between this show and the Arrowverse was pretty tenuous.
Yeah, so I guess this is the end of the Flarrowverse, and also, yeah, they've completely wrapped up last year the Fox X-Men saga. It's like these long-running superhero sagas are coming to an end, and I guess there are other ongoing superhero sagas, but it does feel like we're at a sort of a sea change point when suddenly like a lot of the old stuff is shuffling off the scene. So yeah, hope to be replaced with something, I guess.
It is almost as if people are starting to feel that having these like long-standing continuities with loads of shows or loads of movies and loads of history is actually not something they want and are aspiring to.
Yeah, interesting. I'm sure we'll come back to that point.
Probably, yes. Before that, though, Alistair, what have you done in the last fortnight?
So I've been enjoying a very large amount of music that's been released recently. For some reason, 3 major albums dropped on one day. Lots of stuff that I was very excited for. I don't know if it's just coincidence, it's just bands that I like all releasing albums in one day. But yeah, we got the debut album from Prima Queen, The Prize, which is pretty good. Most recent album from Self Esteem, A Complicated Woman, which has its moments. But I'm not here to talk about those specifically. What I would like to talk about is the new album from a band that is, rapidly becoming one of my favourites, Viagra Boys. That album is called, was either self-titled or Viagra Aboys. I'm not exactly sure. They seem to just move the space around just to be confusing. Yeah, so this is their new album. I think it's the 4th or 5th studio album. I should have had that information to hand. And yeah, their last album was very good, and yeah, launched them off on a big tour. It was very successful, so there was a lot of anticipation for this. What I can say is that it lives up to that anticipation. It's goes pretty hard. It's, for a band that's kind of punk or post-punk or punk adjacent or whatever you want to call it, what we're doing now, it's pretty hard, it's pretty fast, but it's got their signature humor and signature sort of slightly dark edge to it, and it's a really specific tone, but it's a tone that works really well. So yeah, I can certainly recommend this strongly if you're interested in some contemporary punk music.
Yeah, I too like Viagra Boys and have listened to the new album Viagra Boys, and it's good stuff. I think it's got a lot of enjoyable, fun, bouncy tunes and the usual sort of dry, funny, satirical and slightly sort of deliberately grim or sordid or knowingly disgusting lyrics, which Viagra Boys clearly enjoy. There's clearly a sort of sarcastic sleaziness which they quite like slotting into their songs, and they've got a good sort of sound to go with it.
Yeah, I think sarcastic sleaziness is probably like the best way to put it. I mean, yeah, there's lots of songs about being doped up on drugs, painkillers or whatever, and sort of being a bit hopeless, but yeah, usually also with some sort of dark mocking humor. Or there's some songs that are just slightly depraved another way. I mean, one particular favorite is the second track on the album, The Bog Body, about some character who's obsessed with a mummified body found in a peat bog. That, it just seems to be a sort of weird sexual obsession of this character, which is kind of funny and kind of dark at the same time. I think that kind of sums up the what they're going for.
Yeah. They had a song on the previous album, Cave World, which was called Punk Rock Loser, in which this sort of character narrator sang about how they weren't just some punk rock loser, while also making them sound like the scummiest loser imaginable, which is again very much on tone. And yeah, more of that here. Yeah, the opening track, Man Made of Meat, is probably certainly the most immediate song here. It's very sort of big, catchy indie rock, punk rock, post-punk, who knows. I'm not a genres person.
Guitar music, something like that, or heavy music, as I've seen.
/ punk guitar music, yeah.
I see Wikipedia's pegged the album as alternative rock / punk rock / post-punk / dance punk / arc punk / new rave. And I think at that point you could basically say just like, it's just guitars, they're heavy and fast and with a wide and eclectic variety of influences. You guess maybe we should resist the urge to pigeonhole things so precisely. But they do have a unique sound, both musically and in the sort of subjects they write about, sort of the tone they explore. There really is not another act like them that has like the same, I guess, like kind of tone or approach. I mean, last time we saw them live, they came out in with sort of shirts and incredibly short cut-off shorts and things like that, and sunglasses, and just forms a very bizarre look on stage. Apart from their keyboard player, who also had like a giant fluffy pink cowboy hat. Their lead singer pretty much always gets shirtless, and he is shall we say, not a conventionally attractive man, to be as polite as possible, but it's all very much in the sort of like, it's there to subvert your expectations, be a bit punk, be a bit out there, a bit lewd. We're both seeing them live next week, probably probably they'll be in the past by the time you're listening to this. So yeah, who knows what they'll have in store for us this time in the live show. But yeah, the last album was a real blaster of an album, and yeah, it was accompanied by an excellent live tour. So I really hope the same can be said for this time.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to it. They are, as I guess you might expect for a band with this much personality, they are a lot of fun live. So yes, I'm looking forward to that as well. Yeah, this is another good album. I think possibly if I was doing my chart or my tier list of Viagra Boys albums, I'd probably put Cave World slightly above it, just because I enjoyed the sort of concept albumness of it. I think it has slightly more very memorable songs, but maybe I'll change my mind about that last point once I've listened to the new album a few more times.
Yeah, I agree with you that I think I preferred Cave World so far, but it's a sort of unfair comparison because the Cave World was an incredibly strong album that I really, really liked. So to say this one's not quite as good is not to say it's bad. It's just not quite as good. And what I liked about Cave World, I think, is it had a sort of political edge to it. It seemed to very much be responding to something in the moment. The rise of the alt-right, right-wing internet trolls, and that kind of whole sort of disgusting subculture. And I do feel also that their kind of mocking and again sort of lewd tone is kind of perfect for mocking fascism, the alt-right and people like that. But yeah, with songs about accusing the alt-right of being like cave dwellers and unevolved and things like that, rather than mounting some kind of like defense of whatever it is the alt-right is against, it's more about just like insulting them in the most kind of crude and lewd way possible, playing into that and sort of violent and slightly disturbed imagery and rhetoric of the far right, and linking that to both violent cave people and sort of basement dwelling drugged up losers. There was something I felt that was actually quite a sharp critique of contemporary politics dressed up in songs about disgusting losers being horrible people. So it's kind of hard to describe, but the tone really works with that kind of aggressive satirization stroke sort of outright rhetorical attack.
Cave World felt very much like the right album for the moment. It was widely, I think, acclaimed as one of the best guitar albums of that year. Was it 2022, 23?
22.
22. So saying the new one might not be quite as good as Cave World is not damning with faint praise. It is just saying it is merely very, very good instead of a possible enduring classic.
Yeah, exactly, And what you get here is very much, a Viagra Boys album. I like their tone, I like their humour, I like their sound, their musicianship, their kind of like long instrumental bits that kind of, sometimes like devolve into just noise and banging, but also, have this, real sense of rhythm to them, especially when performed live. So, I mean, all that good stuff has been on previous Viagra Boys album, but here it's all together and it's like firing really, really well. As you say, Man Made Out of Meat is a really sort of catchy guitar rock song with like a great hook. Could pull out lots of songs I really liked. Uno 2, also catchy. Pyramid of Health, pretty good. The penultimate track, Best in Show, is one that's really just descend into a sort of cacophony but has a sort of dark beauty to it. There's a lot of really solid stuff on here.
No, I agree. I still need to fully acquaint myself with some of the non-singles, which is everything after track 4. But I really liked You Need Me, and I think Waterboy is good as well. It's just all good. I'm excited to become more familiar with it.
Yeah, and there is, I feel, some form of a political edge to this as runs through most of their music in that, sort of it points at the hopelessness of life, especially in sort of like post-industrial communities. Again, in Man Made of Meat, it makes a reference to saying that if this was the 1970s, I'd have a job in a factory. So it is kind of gesturing at that wider politics and the kind of state of the world, maybe not in as precise way as Cave World was, but it does run through their tone very much so. And although they are quite humorous, there's a lot of silly songs. I mean, it's a band called Viagra Boys, which is both attention grabbing and kind of silly and provocative and kind of punk. But for something they call Viagra Boys, they do actually, I feel, have something to say. But beneath the humor, there is a sort of critique and a sort of vision of a world gone awry that needs some kind of political restitution to it, which is what I like about all their music. It's again, that's strongest in Cave World, but it's still present here. So I am really much enjoying that aspect of the album.
No, as you say, the general Viagra Boys vibe is still very much here. There's still a fair few sort of biting moments. I think there's something about smoking crypto in one of them, which is obviously a bit of a dig. And A Man Made of Meat has a grim spoken word interlude at one point about subscribing to your mum's OnlyFans or something, which is one of those things that's probably both a great contemporary satire and just quite a grim childish joke.
Yeah, exactly, It is both kind of quite funny when I listen to it, but also, sounds like a dark reflection of the modern world. And speaking of dark reflections of the modern world, it's not Black Mirror. It's actually... What is this?
And speaking of forgetting to read your notes... Okay, and now, rising from the grave like Superman himself, it's Daredevil Born Again. This is, of course, a sequel series to the Daredevil series from Netflix from a few years back, part of that whole Defenderverse initiative that we covered in a fair amount of detail on this podcast. I think we reviewed almost all of the seasons of that on this show, and yes, now we're back. And yes, this is set a few years after the end of Daredevil. Matt Murdock plus his supporting characters from that show, Karen and Foggy, are practicing law in Hell's Kitchen, and of course, things are about to go horribly wrong. Partly because someone's about to launch a personal attack on them, and partly because the Kingpin, Vincent D'Onofrio, who has been making a sort of soft comeback in a few recent Marvel shows, but is definitely fully back in action here, is about to make a play for political power. And yes, that then leads us into a whole new season of Daredevil as Matt Murdock deals with the horrific fallout of the attack in the first episode, the Kingpin's rise to power, and a whole bunch of other stuff, including a new supervillain who's a sort of evil graffiti artist serial killer, and so much more. We have seen all 9 episodes of Daredevil Born Again. We'll probably do some spoilers at some point. Alistair, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I feel the show is really tense, very entertaining. There's also a genuine sense of sort of escalating tension throughout, which was really good. You know, it sort of started with quite a strong, intriguing opening with both the main characters, Daredevil, Matt Murdock, and the Kingpin, Wilson Fisk, turning their back on their superhero, supervillain identities and trying to go straight. And this show is very much set up as, the sort of rivalry and kind of conflict between these two characters. And both the actors are very talented and they're good together, and there's a real sense of two titans of New York facing against each other, and I thought that worked really well. There was also, I think, less of a feeling of this being like a chopped up movie, which is definitely something we've criticized previous Defenderverse shows and Disney Plus superhero shows. This did kind of feel like it had a bit more of a plot for each episode. There were some arc plots that ran across a couple of episodes. There were even some like standalone episodes. There were bits when Daredevil actually did some lawyering and did some actual genuine crime fighting that weren't connected to the main arc plot. I feel that the structure was possibly a bit off. We'll probably get into more details in that in a bit, but there was the new villain, the serial killer called Muse that you alluded to at the top of the review, kind of only appeared really in the middle of the show, and I felt it was a bit of a gear shift in that this character sort of suddenly was a big part of the show and then was suddenly not, shall we say. And I felt that that structure could have been handled a bit better, but the finale was good. I'll come to my specific thoughts on the final episodes after a bit, but overall I did think that this was an entertaining show.
I enjoyed this. I thought it was a really enjoyable, atmospheric bit of sort of crime superhero business. It felt like they, captured a lot of what worked about the Netflix show, but maybe did tweak it a little bit. I think the Netflix show seemed to enjoy a certain slightly ponderous slowness, which was sometimes a bit frustrating. I have broadly positive memories of the Daredevil show, especially from the Netflix era. I think apart from one slightly rubbish story involving ninjas, it was largely pretty good. But it was not the fastest paced of TV shows. We were very much in a peak Netflix era, and I think they have slightly moved us forward into the modern world and given us a little bit more speed, a little bit more urgency, a little bit more sense of stuff actually happening. And also maybe a little bit more willingness to at least lean a little bit more into the sort of comic bookiness of it and give us at least a bit more melodrama and a bit more big comic book villains and action, rather than insisting on a real grimy level of street hand-to-hand combat only. There are elements of that that's missing. I feel like there was a certain air of real physicality to the combat on the Netflix show, which I do slightly feel has been let go a bit here. But on the other hand, I do enjoy the fact that it's a bit less determined to be gritty, to the point that it never feels like a big action comic show.
Yeah, they did reproduce some elements of the violence from the Netflix series. I think, the opening episode of this has the Netflix version's signature bit of the one long shot fight sequence when they just follow Daredevil fighting his way up a building or something like that, taking on lots of different people, or in this case I think it's just fighting one supervillain rather than 100 goons. In one long shot that kind of looks really brutal and vicious. So they did reproduce their element of it. But even though they were doing some of the stuff from the the Netflix versions, this does feel a bit more of a reflection of now. As you say, it's only 9 episodes, so they tightened it up from the sort of 13 or so that they did for Netflix. And also there was elements of Daredevil actually doing some regular crime fighting and some regular lawyering, especially the crime fighting side. A lot of these shows, I think the thing they kind of miss is that they want to tell this big epic story, again, usually over across an entire season, which gives it the feeling of a film that's been chopped up into just hour-long chunks. They want to tell a big story about something significant about the character, a sense of them growing and, interrogating their soul and getting under the skin and having some detailed characterization, which you can do across 13 hours. And all of that's laudable stuff, but I think they sometimes miss kind of the essential appeal of these characters, which is, Daredevil, the masked vigilante, should probably fight some crime at some point, and it doesn't all have to be like, a huge introspective journey of discovery and overcoming something in order to defeat a villain. I mean, Batman media, I feel is especially bad for missing the point of, Batman should just investigate some mysteries and fight some crime, which as he did in the Robert Pattinson one. But this, I thought, kind of nailed that tone really well. Like, there was an episode, where he foils a bank robbery that doesn't seem to connect into the wider plot. He just gets caught up in a bank robbery, and then, through his cunning and his martial arts skills, manages to save some lives, get some bad guys arrested, and generally save the day. And that was probably one of the stronger episodes.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. That felt like a standalone episode of TV in a way that these sort of shows often don't manage. And I've complained before when covering superhero shows in the modern era. I think I probably said this about the previous Netflix Daredevil run, that, they're designed to be a certain level of, like, procedural. I mean, one of the reasons Daredevil is a lawyer is because, he has his law practice as a way to generate, plot. Clients can come in and give Matt Murdock cases, which in turn can lead to Daredevil investigating crimes. And it's weird that the Netflix show did not seem particularly keen to take advantage of that obvious built-in story engine, whereas here there is at least some effort to do that, which I appreciated. But I thought the White Tiger stuff in the second and third episode was quite strong. I thought quite a good Matt Murdock and Daredevil actually doing their thing storyline. Yeah,
that was the bit of the show that really dived into him doing his lawyering, which was also part of the early bit of the show when he's trying to leave Daredevil behind and Fisk is trying to leave Kingpin behind, and they're trying to be straight normal people. And the show has this overall arc which I did really like, of these people being unable to escape their kind of true nature. I mean, it's an often stated thing about superheroes that, for Superman, Clark Kent's the mask, Superman's the real person. But then, as people pointed out, actually for Batman or Daredevil or Spider-Man, that's the real person. Daredevil's the real person, Matt Murdock's the mask that Daredevil wears. And that element of it being this person inside you that you kind of can't escape from, or sort of destiny you can't move away from, and whatever you try to do, you kind of get dragged back to it, was one of the most interesting aspects of this show. And having kind of a good and a bad version of that with both Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk, Daredevil straight to Kingpin, trying to escape from their old lives and just being inadvertently pulled back into it by circumstances, each other, and the sort of innate nature of their characters. And that was kind of some of the most interesting meaty stuff to dig into, and it was going on in the background. But I did like it early on when, again, Matt Murdock trying to be a bit of a lawyer and sort things out and like help someone on doing some pro bono work, but also discovering that the system's kind of stacked against poor people who've committed petty crime. So there was a sort of probably a bit more political than I kind of expected a Disney Plus show that didn't have a particularly strong political angle in the first place. So that was interesting as well as well done.
Yeah, and they're at least somewhat poking the concepts of cops who idolise the Punisher, which is kind of interesting. And I mean, I think with Daredevil, if anything, Daredevil is one of the classic Marvel characters where Matt Murdock is the real person and Daredevil is just a mask. The idea is that it is always Matt Murdock up there. It's not like Batman, where you get the feeling that he only really cares about being Batman and Bruce Wayne is just something he does to occasionally further his Batman investigations, or when he has to obtain money. Bruce Wayne doesn't really have a life. His problems don't really interfere with Batman's activities because Bruce Wayne barely exists, whereas I think with Daredevil and with Spider-Man as well, the costumed alter ego is constantly struggling with the secret identity's problems.
Yeah, and I do like also with this that they have maintained the whole secret identity side to it. A lot of, especially the films, have kind of dispensed that. I'm thinking of like, Iron Man, Captain America, things like that. They're pretty straight up with like, these people don't have secret identities. But this felt more sort of true to this, what we expect from a lot of superhero stories, which is, people having secret identities, double lives. They've introduced a new girlfriend character in this, who again is sort of weaved into the plot by also being the Fisk's marriage counsellor. And also, he's got to struggle with, the fact that he's got a secret life and he's hiding stuff from sort of the closest person in his life. He's hiding things from his colleagues who are also his friends because he's a lawyer. So obviously colleagues and friends are basically the same thing. They're dealing with that. Again, the show is kind of dealing with the issue of like, you have this double life, or there's two aspects for you and you try to escape one, you try to leave it behind, and it still gets into every aspect of your life in some way. It's a metaphor for, I guess, anything from obsession to addiction to, having some other form of secret identity, being a sexuality or a subculture or something like that. The fact that like you can't just neatly cleave your life in two or neatly walk away from part of yourself. You're always kind of being pulled back into it, and it does kind of make a lot of really interesting drama from that.
Well, especially because obviously Matt Murdock isn't just having to skip out on dates to do Spider-Man jobs like Peter Parker is. He also, he's also dancing on both sides of the law. I imagine if his secret identity were outed, well, this storyline has been done in the comics, so yeah, I suspect he'd probably get disbarred and go to prison.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think, yeah, if you're convicted of a crime, then I think you'll lose your license to practice law. And obviously, like, even though some of these people are criminals, bashing people with nunchucks is against the law. I can see, yeah, and maybe that's where they're going to go with this in the future, because they are going to make more of it, I believe.
There is at least one more season confirmed. Marvel keep making vague noises that they'd like to get back to something resembling a traditional TV production model and actually produce, seasons that come out more quickly than once every 4 years. So you never know. They have at least committed to that by committing to 2 series straight up of Daredevil Born Again. Whether this has gone well enough for them to then go straight into a 3rd season, I guess we'll have to wait and see.
This does tonally feel more like an old school TV show. I think something about having these standalone episodes in it as well, sort of short plots that run over small bits, did make it, feel a bit more old school in that way.
Yeah, I felt like I'd witnessed a bit more actual events in the life of Matt Murdock than I sometimes did in the old show. It felt like he went through more than one thing in the course of this show. It felt like I saw a decent chunk of his life.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I really enjoyed this. I mean, there's still quite a while to go this year and quite a lot of superhero adaptations threatening to be unleashed on us, but this is probably one of the better superhero things we've had so far this year on film and TV.
Yeah, it was definitely entertaining. I do feel that the plot could have been structured a bit better. I mean, there's probably going to be spoilers at this point. We'll start with the spoiling the middle of the show, and then we'll see if we discuss the end. But yeah, if you want to be unspoiled, this is your warning. This is your final warning. Yeah, so I did like their new villain they've introduced, Muse. Yeah, a serial killer graffiti artist who, murders people and mixes their blood to make his paint on these murals that he does. And yeah, that character was sort of introduced and, was a very creepy, dark foil for Daredevil. Another man in a mask living a double life. And I just felt the character could have been served better. Partly because he's kind of the central focus of about 2 episodes, really, and then he's killed, and that's kind of the end of that. And that's before the end. So rather than linking him into the primary conflict, it kind of feels very much relegated to a kind of secondary conflict. And they introduce other aspects at the end. They bring the Punisher back, and they bring back Bullseye. So it kind of felt like towards the end, the show was sort of moving from bit to bit, lacking focus, where I really wanted to kind of pare down to some core drama. I mean, it's still pretty good because it keeps, the relationship with the Kingpin. That is kind of the main conflict, and so it never strays too far from that. And it's not a major criticism, but I did feel the structure could have been handled better, weaving in Muse more into the ending rather than just having him there in the middle, and also sort of building up this character, then revealing very quickly the identity behind the mask, and not again linking that into any of the other interpersonal conflicts or conflicts in the shows. So it was just one of those things where I felt that like there was possibly a way this could have been handled better.
Yeah, I do think the Muse thing felt a bit weird and unevenly handled. I don't mind them having a secondary supervillain who's really just there to give Daredevil someone to punch during the phase of the show when he can't yet punch the Kingpin. But yes, it felt a bit uneven in its pacing. It felt like it was sort of bubbled away, barely there for a few episodes, then suddenly jumped to the forefront, and then suddenly ended, which was a bit strange. But I did enjoy his visual. I did think he was a cool idea, and I also enjoyed them then coming back to the Kingpin and Bullseye in the final 2 episodes. Yeah,
I think overall it was good. I just feel I'd be remiss in not pointing that out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a symptom of we haven't talked about this much, and I don't know if we need to talk about it in punishing detail, but the slightly Frankensteinian way this show was made, whereas I gather they made 6 episodes, then made a new pilot to stick at the beginning of those 6 episodes, and then made the last 2 episodes, and they ditched the showrunner before filming that new pilot. And also I think there was quite a lot of reshoots and drop-ins and stuff. Like obviously the scene with the Punisher in the middle of the season was dropped in to set up the stuff at the end, because I don't think the Punisher was in it until the second showrunner came on board. And Foggy dying wasn't a thing until they did the reshoots, so everything that references Foggy dying in the middle part of the show would have had to be inserted after they'd filmed those episodes. So considering the chopping up involved, I'm impressed it's as coherent as it is.
Yeah, and it is a good show despite that. But yeah, and I suppose I guess it's inevitable that this is the sort of the outcome of this kind of process of making things. And at least, like I say, they do keep focus on the core things, like, the relationship between Matt Murdock and Fisk, which is an interesting relationship. And it's got lots of political parallels. I like the fact that the whole thing is kind of a microcosm of American politics, but centered on New York. Fisk is the mayor in this one, but there's a lot of plots of him. He engaged in executive overreach, much like Trump. He creates his own private army of former policemen, similar to things Duterte was accused of in the Philippines, and other strong men of having their own private armies sort of stroke hit squad to just take out people they don't want. It's a sort of superhero-esque, but also kind of compelling vision of modern American fascism in some ways, with the Kingpin at the center of it, and also made even more, I guess, immediate by the fact that Kingpin's private hit squad are cops who have been disbarred for being overly violent or aggressive. A lot of them idolize the Punisher. Again, we've seen violent cops with Punisher t-shirts and things like that. A lot of them engage in sort of extrajudicial killings a la the Punisher. So yeah, I do feel that actually, yeah, it was more political than I expected in that regards. And I did feel it worked quite well talking about wider politics and kind of showing things like executive overreach and the sort of slide towards fascism within the kind of the very much the parallels of the show. It would have been a very different show if the Kingpin had become president, probably a bit too on the nose, but it works kind of well, staying true to its roots as a show about New York and treating New York as a microcosm of all American politics.
Yeah, and I'll be interested to see, I don't know, how the scale of it changes next season. Are we going to go from this sort of legal drama to this idea of New York as some sort of anarchic martial law landscape? Or is it going to sort of settle down a bit and go back to being a law show again? I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, ruled over by one tyrannical leader of his own private army, a la Chechnya, or places like that. I always get the pronunciation wrong. Anyway, it's interesting, yeah. And it's also, I thought it was just a really good show about New York. It kind of just captures New York really well, the character of the place. Everything from sort of evocative shots to the Brooklyn Bridge to the places where people hang out, go for food, the bars, the street, the graffiti culture. There's quite a lot of vox pops and things like that. One of the main characters is a journalist, and you get kind of her vox pops of people on the street, and it feels very authentically New York. So yeah, I thought it is a pretty good depiction of New York that shies away from the over-romanticization or the over-gothicization, to coin an awkward phrase, that some depiction of New York has. It did feel actually like a believable depiction of New York in a sort of superhero world.
Yeah, and it was interesting to see them make an effort to, I don't know, give it a bit of a sense of scale, even though they are, as ever, usually doing the TV trick of actually only really shooting a few people in a few rooms. But by going outside and doing these vox pops and dropping them in, it does feel a bit like it actually takes place in a wider New York. Yeah,
it's got a strong sense of place, which actually I would also say the original Daredevil on Netflix did also have a strong sense of place, as did Luke Cage as well. The show, yeah, they did. On also Netflix, I felt I had a very strong sense of place, specifically Harlem, and this one is a depiction more of Hell's Kitchen and downtown Manhattan, but it's got a strong sense of place. The other Defenderverse shows, I felt that's one of the things they lost that kind of made them a bit more generic. But this also, yeah, one of the things I liked about the Defender stuff they carried on is this strong sense of place. So yeah, I mean, yeah, there's lots of things to praise about this show.
Yep, I'll be interested to see if any of the other Defenders, except for the Punisher, I guess, come back next year. I really thought they were talking so much about building an army towards the end of the last episode that they were going to finish by showing us Luke Cage or Jessica Jones or someone standing in the bar, but they didn't quite go there.
No, I guess they're not willing to tease too much of the other Defenderverse characters being returned when I guess they don't know how much appetite there is for more of those characters, partly because most of their shows sort of trailed off a bit. This does obviously end on a pretty big cliffhanger. I'd have preferred a slightly more conclusive ending. It's very much a cliffhanger for the next season, but I suppose it was always conceived of at least to being a 2-season story, and having a strong cliffhanger actually again is more like an old school serial that runs year and year rather than these kind of more discrete units of storytelling that are more popular in the streaming age. When I say discrete units of storytelling, I mean one season. That's just a pretentious way of saying the same thing.
Oh yeah, I think when we knew they were filming the second season shortly after the first one, a cliffhanger was probably inevitable. Okay, and last up today, it's Black Mirror. This is, of course, Charlie Brooker's anthology of sci-fi techno-horror satire, which started off in Channel 4 many moons ago, and is now on Netflix with a higher budget and access to Hollywood stars. And yes, we're back with Season 7. We last covered this, I think, back in Season 3, but it's been chugging on, reminding us that not only is the world terrible, but the future will probably be terrible as well. And yes, this is the 7th season. The big notable change point here is that this is the first ever direct sequel in Black Mirror history, as there is a follow-up to the popular Season 4 episode USS Callister. But as well as that, there's 5 other standalone anthology stories of grim techno-horror. So yep, let's get into it. Alistair, what did you think?
So this series seemed to pick up the vibe I got from the previous series, which is that the show has moved on from being a direct satire of techno-utopianism, best summed up by, I think, the catchphrase of the second season, "The future is broken," all about, very much exploring the dark side of tech and focusing their stories along how tech robs us of our humanity specifically. That element is still very much part of the show. It's not become a different show, and to greater and lesser degrees in difference of the stories. But I do feel there's sort of been an evolution in what they're trying to achieve, in that there's a bigger, diverse range of stories they're trying to tell. There are less dark stories about technology. There are some quite nice stories. There are some stories with happy endings. It's not like they're trying every single time to basically make you feel like you've been punched in the face after you watch an episode. There was very much the feeling of certainly those early Channel 4 seasons. And I actually quite like that because, after a while it gets kind of samey feeling like being punched in the face all the time. There are some ones that have some quite shocking bits. We might get into specifics. But the variety of tone and the interesting range of sci-fi stories with the huge Netflix budget and stars that Netflix attract did actually, I felt made this an entertaining sort of cyberpunk style show, which very much my jam.
Yeah, no, I think I last saw Black Mirror for season 4, so I have technically skipped the last 2 seasons. I did also watch the Bandersnatch thing, which is good. There's actually a sort of indirect bit of crossover from that in this as well. But yeah, no, I thought this was another decent sort of anthology selection. I think, as you say, the big change from classic Black Mirror, I guess, is that there's, I don't know, it feels like he's a bit less dead set on every episode having the absolute worst possible, abandon all hope, everything is lost, here's another regular person getting fucked ending. There's a little bit more variety here. It's not all, fairy tale endings and happiness. It's just maybe a little bit more moral ambiguity or confusing uncertainty or things left hanging rather than just going straight to everything is the absolute worst and we're all going to die, which is, I think, a bit more interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I should probably say at this point that we're probably going to have to drop some spoilers, at least for the episodes we'll discuss. We'll try not to divulge any twists that are really best sat on, but, probably there's going to be some spoilers for stuff that comes up. So, for example, I felt the first episode was, very much your classic Black Mirror. Some ordinary people, it's called common people, in reference to people on the common plan for tech products. There's a couple, woman ends up, she has a stroke, they put some tech in her head to make her better, but then they get stuck on a dystopian subscription model thing, making things getting worse, and then ultimately the man does something depraved on the internet to make some money, and it all ends horribly. And it's kind of some classic Dark Mirror, tech robbing us of our humanity, being exploited by big companies. It does have some pretty good satire of big tech, considering this was on Netflix as well, and they're satirizing not only big tech but subscription model platforms, including some quite good jokes about when the woman's knocked onto an ad-supported tier and she just started spouting adverts randomly, and which obviously is something, ad-supported products is something Netflix have rolled out. So, I don't know, there's some good satire there, but it did very much feel like your classic Black Mirror.
That's basically the main notes I've got about it. It's kind of straight classic Black Mirror. If you want to criticise it, it's a bit predictable as a result, but it is a decent example of the form. I think, again, we're in standard Black Mirror territory here, which means basically decent, likeable, desperate people getting screwed over by tech, and Chris O'Dowd and Rashida Jones are very good choices for that, as they're both incredibly likeable. Yeah, and the satire about subscription site enshittification is very well observed and, as you say, entertaining, but it's on Netflix, a site which is several steps down the enshittification staircase.
Yeah. But it doesn't seem to have the immediacy or the searing intensity that some of those early Channel 4 episodes have, even though they told similar stories. I don't know if the edge has worn off because we're all over tech dystopias, or the fact that we're living in one means we're a bit more inured to this sort of stuff, or there's the fact that we've just seen a lot of Black Mirror, especially I have. But although it was good, and it's, very much them saying, look, we're still doing classic Black Mirror. It wasn't the strongest one in that series. For example, I really liked the second last one, Eulogy, which was a very emotional story about an old man, played by Paul Giamatti, going into his memories of his kind of the great love he had in his early 20s with this woman and the tragic ending to that story. And it's just got real heart and real pathos to it. It's got a bittersweet, ending to it. Its main thing is the fact that Paul Giamatti is just great at playing a kind of nuanced and complex character. He's a very, very talented actor and can bring real humanity to a part and make this old person see both grumpy but also nuanced, nice, complex. Maybe he wasn't the nicest person ever when he was young, but also he was young and, now he's full of regret. But also, kind of use the technology and then the sort of virtual reality worlds he moves through as a kind of interesting storytelling construct. worked. But it felt like I saw this character's whole life in an hour, and with a kind of strong emotional ending that also wasn't just horribleness at the end. So that one I felt actually, yeah, kind of, even though maybe an evolution of the tone, possibly a tone that hardcore fans of really like darkly upsetting Black Mirror might not be here for, but I thought that was one of the really strong moments of this season.
Yeah, I thought that was probably the best episode of the season, possibly the one that might get to join the Black Mirror Masterpiece Hall of Fame. I think possibly how much you like it depends. I don't know, I think maybe it's a bit, as you say, a bit low impact for some. I think maybe it might depend how much you relate to the emotions, but as someone who is slightly over 40 and has started to be able to look back on his old life and think about his decisions and have regrets, then there's plenty for me here, yes. I know being over 40 does not make me the oldest, saddest man in the world, but, you know, I'm old enough to relate to this.
I think everyone has the feeling, and especially anyone who's like, middle-aged or older, has this feeling of, you can look back and say, what if my life went a different way? It kind of tapped into that relatable, universal emotional experience, where it's something like the first episode was very much like, exploring the idea of what if you got fucked over massively by a big tech company, which, not saying there's not importance in telling such a salient and politically relevant story right now, but it doesn't have that kind of universal experience, I guess, that kind of deep emotional register that the Eulogy one was working on. And yeah, obviously Paul Giamatti is excellent. I did like also, I think it's the third episode, the one that was slightly longer, not as long as the finale, but about when they're digitally remaking a film from the 1950s, in a sort of virtual world, and the actor from the present day, a woman, there's a recast the film both race-wise and gender-wise, gets trapped in there with the AI of the original character, and they sort of fall in love. It is another sort of queer romance virtual reality one, which they've done before, but it did feel fresh. It's got a really interesting stylistic approach in that most of it's in black and white and really does look like an old film. There's certainly the dialogue from the old film. They must have watched God knows how many hours of Here to Eternity or things like that, and so all absolutely nail that sort of vintage Hollywood dialogue. But it looks beautiful and had a sort of sweet story in it, with again a bittersweet happy ending again, which is, I felt, a tone of variance for Black Mirror. So again, liked it a lot.
I thought this was, again, nice in a sort of slightly quiet, thoughtful way, but one doesn't necessarily automatically associate with Charlie Brooker. I know he has co-writers on this season on a few of the episodes, but yeah, there's not really a devastating twist beyond a certain point. There's just another sort of sad story about missed connections with maybe a delicate sprinkling of satire about the use of AI in art. And yeah, I liked it a lot. I found the ending a bit odd. I don't quite know how. I don't know. It's honestly quite hard to explain, but I didn't feel it quite resolved things for me. It just left things on a bit of a strange, ambiguous note, and I can't quite decide if it's an ambiguity I like or if it just didn't feel quite complete. But it was a very affecting story, and I thought the main actor was very good.
Yeah, I agree with you that maybe the ending could have been a bit better in that. It's a classic short story approach. I mean, Black Mirror episodes have a lot in common with short stories or short films, and these short stories isn't necessarily just a longer story made shorter, as you might believe, or a short film. They're usually like a scene or a piece or something like that. Many of them explore like ongoing processes that loop round and round and round, and you can see one version of the cycle or things like that. Or they kind of take a piece of something and gesture at the wider world, but sometimes you have to, I don't know, be willing to go with the ambiguity or the willingness to kind of say, like, you have as much as you need, use your imagination to interpret the rest, but sometimes you feel like, I've just not been given enough, I wanted something more from this. I mean, it's a very personal reaction to a story, but you are, presented with characters in a situation and a sense of dramatic tension, so that, we naturally crave some kind of resolution to that as storytelling beings. Again, there's all slightly pretentious ways of talking about TV show, but I do feel like, they need to tell a discrete story, and they are very efficient, these Black Mirror stories. Sometimes there's a bit of heavy-handed dialogue, but each one sets up a world and a character and usually tells a whole story, but the ending is the hardest thing to pull off, especially if they're trying not to do just, and then horrible things happen and everyone's miserable. So yeah, I can see why that one didn't quite work, but I did also like the fact they were trying to do something a bit different from previous ones, and also from San Junipero. It felt like they were trying to come up with new ideas, so even if it didn't quite work, I feel they should be praised for trying new things and experimenting and being a bit different.
Yeah, I didn't dislike the episode. I actually found it quite weirdly riveting while I was watching it. I just was left with a very slight annoying sense of what that is at the ending.
Yeah.
Still, as you say, a good bit of filmmaking, and as a concept, quite interesting. I genuinely had no idea where it was going a lot of the time, which I always enjoy.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there was really a weak one this season. Again, probably my least favourite was the first one, which was just very much like classic Black Mirror. The second one was a sort of quite good dark story of a woman's life falling a bit. It's probably the one that least had anything to do with tech or satirising or exploring technology. It was revealed that the way that this person's life can be manipulated so much is due to their nemesis having a quantum entanglement computer, something vaguely sci-fi, but it's one of those stories when...
It's magic, okay? It's just sci-fi skins magic.
Exactly, yeah. If the revelation of the episode had been that the nemesis had found an enchanted talisman in an old book, the story would have been exactly the same. This character has godlike powers and is using it to take revenge on their high school bully. Yeah, I mean, it's a good story like that. Again, surprising ending. I did not see where that one's going right at the end with the turnaround. But yeah, I mean, it was just a sort of entertaining short story about a vendetta.
Yeah, it was enjoyable to watch, although the ending was... I mean, I can't say it wasn't conclusive, but to be fair, I did realise, I think, about halfway to 2/3 into it, that surely a satisfying ending would not have been possible. There was no way they could give you something that actually wasn't basically just, yeah, she has magic powers.
And also, yeah, you kind of establish that you like this person and they're being sort of abused by someone with, again, some kind of power over them. And you can't really get to the point of like, and the person is really awful, so they deserve it. But it's kind of hard to root for someone who was a high school bully. It's kind of quite obvious where that one was going from the beginning. Once they drop in, oh, I met this person I used to bully in high school or whatever. And it's like, yeah, I can probably see where this is going. I guess it's one of the classic like Black Mirror ones where everyone's a bit dislikable in that story.
Yeah, to be honest, it was so obvious that I was kind of hoping there was some massive subversion coming, but there wasn't really.
Yeah. And then there was, I mean, are we going to just run down them all? We've talked about all
we've
of them.
done 4 of them at this point. So yeah, Plaything was the 4th one, which is the one with Peter Capaldi in it as a gamer. Enjoyable level of specificity here. I liked the callback to Booker's years as a games journalist in the old magazine days. A fun premise. I thought the ending twist actually worked for me here. I thought that was quite fun.
Yeah, and it was also looped into previous Black Mirror continuity with, some of the cast of the Bandersnatch interactive adventure coming back. Yeah, quite dark. Again, I kind of sort of saw where it was going relatively early on, but it was a bit Twilight Zone, actually. The classic thing where humans are the worst and the other creatures we encounter, supernatural or technological, are actually just like, they're actually nicer than us because they're not inherently violent the way we are. Peter Capaldi obviously does a great performance as the older version of the games writer character. But it was a good sort of Black Mirror type one, but again, didn't really have like a negative ending. It was a sort of, ambiguous ending or possibly a positive ending.
Yeah, weirdly, even though I was complaining about endings not feeling conclusive, I felt like it felt like a good stopping point for that. I felt like it was interesting to just imagine what happened there.
Yeah, what happened next?
Just because they've done such a good job of building up the weirdness of this force that was building in Peter Capaldi's computer.
But yeah, running on originally running on kind of 90s graphics of he installs the game with this old school CD-ROM in like an old school CD reading tray that pops out, and it just really took me back to like memories of playing, I don't know, things like Worms or Civilization 2 or, old school video games, even in the pre-Half-Life days and things like that. Yeah, some technological nostalgia is partly what you want from your Black Mirror.
Yeah, and as I say, I thought the specific sort of early days of gaming nostalgia was kind of part of the fun there, as well as some other general 90s nostalgia.
Yeah, considering how many tech dystopias they are, or modern day ones satirizing specific things that are happening right now, I kind of like the ones that set in the past. Again, Bandersnatch itself probably being the best version of this, but yeah, retro settings were kind of cool.
Yeah, and I guess last of all, the headliner of this season, it's USS Callister Into Infinity, the sequel.
Yeah, which was, it's an hour and a half long, and it was about as epic as cinema feature-length film, was released even, 10, 15 years ago. It had a huge space battle at the end, it had a race against time, it had dimension-transcending plotline, a virtual universe thing, an evil tech company. It kind of had it all. I mean, I quite liked it as just as a film. I guess the fact that it's a sequel to an earlier one meant that the world had been established and some of the dynamics, there's this video game with real people trapped inside it, and it's kind of a realistic virtual reality loosely inspired by Star Trek. I kind of liked how the original USS Callister episode was very much riffing on the 60s Star Trek. In fact, they used even some of they made the sets and costumes look similar to it, and the colorization to make it look old school, whereas this was very much felt like they were bringing the USS Callister into the age of discovery and kind of modern Star Trek, when they have budgets for huge space battles and lots of ships and lasers flying everywhere and things like that, and CGI has got cheap and affordable for at least a show like Black Mirror.
Yeah, this was probably the episode that felt the least like Black Mirror, in that they did just kind of make a fairly straight action sci-fi story. And Yeah, it was quite fun. It didn't necessarily feel like it was, as a result, being super deep and making any massive social commentary, or at least not anything they hadn't already basically said in the first one, but it was quite fun to watch.
Yeah, the original USS Callister episode maybe has something to say about how technology gives power to people maybe who've been overlooked or not particularly valued by mainstream society, but that sometimes means bullying victims make the best bullies sometimes. And, there's just because you've been treated badly doesn't mean you get to, be bad to other people. And, technology gives people, well, in that case, literally the power of a digital god, but it can give people power over other people and they can abuse that. And maybe they're trying to say something again about and the kind of unrestrained nature of technology. It makes this kind of abuse possible. They were kind of saying that very much a couple of seasons ago of USS Callister. This one felt very much more like, let's just do a cool space adventure with like space battles and stuff and like, laser fights and race against time and like things like that. As you said, it's probably not as deep, but it was a pretty just epic hour and a half of like things going bang, which, quite entertaining on a Thursday night.
Well, yeah, and as we said a while back when we were covering The Penguin, Kristen Miliotti's very good. She can anchor something like this pretty easily.
Yeah, she was great in the original one, yeah, and she's like back for this as well, and she does it well, I guess, because we've also enjoyed her in comedy films such as the Groundhog Day one about the wedding, Palm Springs, wasn't it? Black Mirror always has like a sense of humour to it, even if it's like a dark sense of humour, and this one did have a kind of like a running humour through it, which again, she's good at kind of the more humorous moments, especially as the kind of more dramatic moments. But yeah, I know, just in terms of like, again, it did like, it's got a whole film worth of dramatic plot and characterization and events in it with some twists and turns along the way. So I just thought, I thought it was just, that's just a chunk of sci-fi. It's good fun.
Yeah, enjoyed the twist ending as well. That actually might have been one of the most impressively surprising twist endings. I did laugh. Don't really need to spoil it in this podcast, but no, it's a good ending.
Yeah.
Did actually make me want them to do a third one.
Well, maybe they will. There is a sense they feel they're building out a bit more of a Black Mirror shared universe this time, what with the return of some of the characters from Bandersnatch, the USS Callister sequel, Streamberry, which was their kind of spoof version of Netflix, which was mentioned in, I think, a couple of ones in the previous season. Streamberry makes a reappearance here in the one when they're doing the film. So yeah, I don't know. There's some Black Mirror continuity for the mega fans.
Yeah. I don't know how they'd ever make like a hardcore shared universe work, but it's fun to see a little bit of back and forth interaction.
Yeah, a few nods. Like I say, you probably didn't have to have seen Bandersnatch to enjoy the Capaldi one or know what Streamberry is for this thing. Yeah, the only one, as you say, this new USS Callister is a direct sequel to the old one. So yeah, they kind of are literally, part 1 and part 2 of a story. That's the most direct one. They are just linked together.
Yeah, which is, something they've never done before. First time in 7 years, and I'll be interested to see if they do more of it. I mean, it was one of the few ones that lent itself to that. A lot of, I don't think there's anything else in this season which I would say, yeah, do a sequel to that. Even Hotel Reverie, which I thought the ending didn't quite work for me. That doesn't mean I need more of it. It's fine. It was a good little short story.
No, there's not really any that need picking up. I mean, usually they give them quite definitive finales, usually horrible ones, which leave you just feeling horrible, like the first episode did, or some of the classic Channel 4 ones, or ones like Eulogy, which, brings you to an emotional point, and you feel that character's had their arc resolved and they've, grown as a person and changed, and you feel they're like, so their story has come to rest. No need to know about what happened next. There isn't usually a lot of scope for sequels in Black Mirror worlds, but this one I think did have one.
Yeah, no, I think the sort of ongoing adventure vibe that they're tapping into with the whole Star Trek analogy is also made it suitable for a sequel. So yeah, pretty good year of Black Mirror. I'm not sure if it was my favourite season. It's been so long since I've watched it, I've kind of lost track. But there's, as ever, a lot of good ideas and, crucially, a lot of good character work in it that makes the ideas work. Yeah,
and there's some effective storytelling, some good political points about the power of big tech, and enough tonal variation to make it feel like they're not doing the same thing over and over. I am enjoying, the tonal variation, because I feel it just loses effect if you just make every episode just ends with horribleness. It shows a greater range and talent as writers and creators if they can invoke a range of emotions and a range of different experiences while still remaining kind of true to the Black Mirror vibe, which I feel they have. Other people may feel differently, but if all you want from Black Mirror is just to feel miserable, this season won't deliver that. But if you want to be entertained and feel something, generally, especially at times, then this is a strong recommend.
Yeah, no, it's back, it's solid. It almost makes me want to go back and watch those 2 seasons I didn't bother watching.
Yeah, actually, I feel there are definitely a few I've not seen, so I am actually feeling right now committed to actually do a full Black Mirror audit and go through and make sure I have seen every single one. And there's definitely at least one season I've not watched, so I should go and watch that. So yeah, remind me that it is a good show, and it's worth being a completist about it. That's all we have time for. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please leave us a review in your podcatcher of choice. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find back issues of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you want to follow us on social media, you can do so on Blue Sky, where we are MFV Podcast, or Twitter, where I think we're also MFV Podcast, to hear all the latest broadcasts about what we're covering and when we're releasing. And you can also follow me. I am Nick Bryan. I can be found on Blue Sky as nickbryan.com with a dot, and on Instagram as nickbryan.com with the dot written out DOT. And there you will hear about my new comic Sold. The second issue, Sold Issue 2, should be on Kickstarter by the time this podcast comes out. There's been some annoying delays, as you will know if you follow me on social media, but God willing, by the time we release this podcast, I should have finally managed to launch that to Kickstarter. There'll probably be a link in the show notes. Please back my comic, especially if you bought Sold 1. We're back. We're carrying on the cliffhanger. You know you want to know what happens next. Cheers.
And you can also get more from me on Blue Sky, Instagram and TikTok by searching for Alistair Ball. And you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. And you can find my theatre reviews at everythingtheatre.com. And you can also join us here next time when we will be teaming up with some dark and disrespected Black Ops superheroes in Thunderbolts Asterisk, and then we will be engaging in some violence down south in Sinners. Join us in 2 weeks' time to find out what we made of those two films. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.